Good morning, beautiful children, and welcome to another chapter of the Birchbark House by Louise Erdrich. And this book is divided up into the seasons. Um, the seasons, a year-long snapshot of a little girl by the name of Okomayas, who is a Native American girl, part of the Eastern Woodland tribes in the United States. And this is a view of her life, of the stories that happened to her. And the last we read, her father, who had been away hunting and trading, came home. And when he came home, he had Angeline and Okomayas watch over the cornfield that was doing very well so that they could scare the crows away that were eating up all the corn. So um, that is where we left off with Father being home. Things seem to be going along quite well, and they're happy that he's home. So now we are in the chapter, and it starts off with the chapter of this portion of the book is called Dagwagging, and that is fall in the native language. So this is now fall, and this chapter is called Fishtail's Pipe. Now in the mornings there was a sharp freshness in the air. Okomayas loved this time of year and jumped from her blankets eagerly, rolled her sleeping mat and fur blanket, and put them away quickly so that she could help rekindle the outdoor cooking fire. Her crow hopped after her, though it could fly short distances. Its wing hadn't yet healed. Andag, the Anabishi or Obawad word for crow, was its name. Nokomias was fond of the crow. The bird often rode on her shoulder and kept her company as she packed dry fish, repaired nets, wove new mats, alongside Okomias, tanned hides they needed now for winter clothing, for jackets and moccasins, for mittens and hoods. Okomias used the gun barrel flesher that her father had given her as a gift. She didn't like the work any better than she had ever had, but the crow's lively company helped. Now the crow even frightened off an owl, and once perched on the head guard of baby Nunu's cradle board, loudly and repeatedly crowed until Mamma came running to find a curious raccoon trying to steal from the bundle of dried fish and venison that she was preparing. Now the crow quickly became everyone's favorite, but the crow slept only near Okomias. He fell asleep just at dusk, perching low on a branch that she had tied into the side of the ribs of the birchbark house. Father spent a few warm fall days making repairs on his canoe, and then it was time for him to leave again. He would make one more big trip before the cold rains and then the harsh snow slashed down. Once he stopped gathering and selling the furs of others, um, of others, he would go on his own trapline, and for the rest of the late fall and winter he would be home and gone, and each time he returned, Okomias thought with a sinking stomach that he would be hauling back skins for her to work on. One afternoon his friends and partners came to visit and make plans. Albert Lapour and Fishtail came walking through the woods. Fishtail, that's his name. Now when Angeline and Okomias saw the men coming, they decided to hide and quickly quickly dived into a heavy stand of a bush. Now peeking between weedy stalks, they had a good view. Albert was round as a kettle, and his big teeth stuck out pleasantly when he grinned. He fancied himself quite a medicine man, and he wore on his throat a circle of bear claws, and next to him walked a tall and handsome man called Fishtail. He had a strikingly long, thick, oiled black hair, and a hawk-thin face with a proud curl to his lips. He carried his pipe in the cradle of his arm, close to his heart. It was a fancy pipe, made of a piece of wood marked with sweet grain. Bands along the stem were carefully beaded in black and yellow. Fishtail took extremely good care of his pipe, cleaned it often, prayed with it every sunrise. To help him, it was a living thing. The bowl of the red pipestone in the shape of an otter's head, which was his clan, the tribe that he came from. There was dark blue pony beads that hung down a swatch of fringe, and Fishtail touched them carefully and lovingly as he stepped quietly along. Now Miquam came out along the path to meet his friends. Miquam is the father. And the men talked and joked before they made themselves comfortable, sitting on blankets on the ground. Okomias saw her father open up his leather pouch of sweet tobacco. Fishtail lit up the pipe, and the fragrance of burning red willow tobacco hung peacefully in the air. Now each man, as he drew in the smoke, wore a look of concentration and peace attention. The pipe passed around the circle twice before any of the men said a word. What they said made Okomias and Angeline creep closer, listen more carefully. So, hidden in the grass and under a bush, they breathed quietly and opened their ears to catch the lower tones of the men's voices. Fishtail said something in a growling tone of indignation, and then they heard it. The word he said meant big knife, and it was used to describe the non-Indian, or the white people who were traveling in larger numbers than ever on their land, and settling down their cabins and their forts and their barns and their gardens and pastures, fences, fur trading posts, churches and missions, schools. LaPointe was becoming more and more upset every day, and there was talk of sending leaders to the west. They say we must leave this island, Fishtail went on. No one commented. Curled against itching nettle leaves, Okomias eased her hand to her leg to scratch. She scratched silently and kept listening. That's right, her father said at last, contempt in his voice. That's what they're saying, the useless ones. Now Albert Laplante drew on the pipe and frowned, tapping and adjusting the tobacco burning in the bowl. He drew deep and puffed hard. He was part French, like father, but browner than Fishtail. His eyes were greenish brown. His round, cheerful face beamed. He sighed, and with a faraway look said that he had a vision. Fishtail and father looked blankly and patiently at him when he said this, for Lepus was known for recounting visions and dreams that had very little meaning, though they seemed to affect him hugely. And now he looked down sternly, gathering his thoughts. Suddenly he blurted out, I dreamed I had lice. In a bush, in the brush, Angeline and Okomias clapped hands over their mouths to stifle their glee. Lice is a kind of a bug that it makes you itch and it gets into things, and it's not necessarily a great thing. It's not very good. So the girls clapped their hands over their mouths to stifle their laughter. Father and Fishtail managed to keep straight faces, but Okomias was sure that she saw the corner of Father's mouth twitch, and he was working hard not to laugh. Now Albert sighed. The meaning is unclear, he muttered. Let us find the meaning, said Father. His voice was serious, but the girls both knew that he was having fun with Le Perture. Now, was anything else happening in your dream? Lepure frowned, as though overcome with the weight of his vision. Yes, he said, we were planning a dance gathering. Ah, said Father, the meaning of this dream now becomes clear. This was a deep dream indeed. What? Lepure said, breathless. From now on, when you dance, Father said without allowing the trace of a smile to come over his face, you will dance hard enough to shed your lice. Yes? Lepure's voice was suspicious. But neither Father nor Fishtail let on any sign that Father's interpretation was just a joke. Perhaps, said Lepure, I should tell you my own thoughts. And then to Angelina and Okomia's surprise and dismay, he told the other men that he was thinking of taking his family, all 10 of his children and his uncles and grandmas and grandpas, to a western post where he had heard government payments were made. Okomias nudged Angeline. Those children were their friends, and to think that they might have to leave. Okomias nearly cried out, but Angeline poked her to be quiet. All of the tribe would be safe on their own land farthest west, Albert was saying. No one would bother them. Yes, there were hazards on the way. There was a Dakota war parties, hunger, the threat of winter's dire weather. He'd rather not go. Still, said jolly Albert, he had moved before when the waves of white people laughed at his feet. West, always west, Father said, agreeing slowly. We hear we hear the white men's axe ring in the woods, chopping trees. We should be gone before the tree falls. We have to stop somewhere. We have to stop somewhere someday. Fishtail drew thoughtfully on the pipe, and the fragrant smoke clouded his face. West is where the spirits of the dead walk. If the whites keep chasing us west, we'll end up in the land of the spirits. I have dreamed that's where they want us to go, anyway, said Albert. That will please them. Oh, they are like greedy children. Nothing will ever please them for long, said Father, and although his grandfather had been French, he was raised and considered himself part of the tribe, and kept the rules of his mother's clan, the clan of the catfish. Only in some uh, people of the tribe, his cabin, for instance, and his ability to play and win white men's games of chess with the trader, um, did he keep his secret that he was half white. Now, not until they have it all, said Fishtail. All our lands, our wild rice beds, our honey grounds, our fishing streams, our gardens. Why, not even when we are gone will they have the bones of our loved ones as they pleased. I have thought about this. Fishtail put up his hands and held it there, looked keenly at his friends, and before they were born, before they came into this world, the white men must have starved as ghosts. They are always hungry, always greedy for more land, more land. The men smoked and with increased intensity, looking deep into the fire as the breeze came up and dusk lowered. Father was thoughtful, his eyes deep and clouded. Even Lepore looked serious, the dimples set hard in his cheeks. Watching in the bushes, Okomias and Angeline waited for them to resume their talking. But that day, mulling over Fishtail's difficult words, perhaps the men kept their silence. So, that is the end of this chapter, and we're going to read one more today. But it seems that the white people are starting to move into the land of Okomias's people, and they want that land. And they're thinking of moving west. So they're feeling crowded and as if they need to move. Okay, the next chapter is fairly short, so I just want to read it real quick to you guys. It is called, maybe it's not so short, it is called Pinch. So we will get started. Pinch. Now Big Pinch got in trouble, and Okomias was glad. Here's how it happened. One day Mama found a bush of late-bearing chokecherries. They were plump and so ripe that they had turned a deep blackish purple color. She picked until her fingers turned red-black at the tips, and when she returned, bearing her load of berries, Mama's eye lit up on Big Pinch. I have a job for you, she said. His eyes got beady and his lip turned out. He pouted at her, but she paid his lower lip no mind. I'm spreading these berries on the bark sheaves so they will dry, she went on, and then she proceeded to spread the berries on the clean birch bark in the warmest patch of sun that she could find. Now, can you please watch over them carefully now, Big Pinch? Keep the birds away. Listen, my son. Mama narrowed her eyes at Pinch so that he would know that he was trusted with an important task. This is your winter seasoning and food. You'll be glad of them when you are hungry in the winter. So she gave Big Pinch a long, ferny branch to wave and made him sit next to the berries. And then she turned her back on him and went out to the lake with Grandma to check their fish nets. She took the baby along with her and put him carefully into his netted cradle, petted and kissed him. Angeline and Okomias were sent to town. They were to sweep out and prepare the family cabin for the winter move. Big Pinch left alone. So the girls were going to go and get their longhouse prepared. Now it was hard being Big Pinch, harder than his sisters would ever know. They didn't understand how good it felt to fill a stomach that so rarely got full. They didn't realize how good it felt to shove handfuls of berries into a greedy mouth. Pinch looked at the berries. Bored, he shooed away a few of the chickadees, and then the crow sat with him on the low branch. But the crow knew better than to eat the berries. If only, thought Pinch sadly, that those berries didn't look so darn delicious. Mamma had found a patch of chokecherries that were much more delicious than most. These were the biggest, fattest berries that Pinch had ever seen. It didn't seem as though it would hurt to eat just a few. Pinch sneaked one, then a few more, and then a handful. The crow cawed 3 times and seemed to disapprove. Pinch made a face at the bird. The berries tasted as good as they looked, even better, richer, blacker, without that mouth-puckering chokecherry taste. He might have just one more handful. Well, he thought not long after he finished that bunch. A handful more, well, that wouldn't hurt. And then, just to balance the look of the berries, he took more from one side and then more from the other. He spread the berries out, and then the bark looked full again. Pinch waited. The sun blossomed slowly, so slowly, and it took such a long time to dry the berries. Pinch tried to amuse himself, but with nobody there to bother, he was at a loss. The crow didn't want to play and flew out of reach. There was nobody to annoy him now. Another handful, another and another. Pinch rearranged the berries once again. Now there seemed to be plenty of berries on the bark. They were very well spaced apart, though, it was true, but the bark leaves looked full. He kept nibbling, spacing, arranging, rearranging, until sleep overcame him, and he curled up tight and nodded away. Pinch! It was Mamma's threatening voice. She was standing tall over the berries, and she wasn't the least bit fooled by Pinch's berry arrangement. What happened? Where are those berries that I picked, you sleepy boy? Pinch woke, jumped up, rubbing his eyes, blinking. It was true. There were very few berries on the bark sheaves. Had he eaten so many? Oh, how could he? How could he? Big Pinch was horrified and very embarrassed. Pinch! Mamma was using her very angry voice now, and Pinch felt so terrible that his brain raced, and he seized suddenly upon a blaming lie. It was the crow. The crow ate them. The bad crow. Okomias's bad crow. Pinch pointed up, and sure enough, there sat the crow, out of reach on a high branch. Certainly looked guilty as he glared down and preened his new growth of feathers. Mamma was furious that her work was all for nothing. She shook her fist in the air and called out to the crow, Come on down and eat the rest of them. The crow, not understanding, hopped down to nearly within a reach and cocked his head in a friendly way, as though to inquire, Are you sure you want me to have them? Aye! Mamma shook the crow's friendliness. Mamma took the crow's friendliness as a sign that he really had eaten up the berries. Mamma grabbed the stick and shook it hard. The crow croaked in alarm, and without a shout she threw back her arm, took a sudden aim at the bird, and hurled the stick. Caw! The crow said as he was hit, and although he was not hit seriously, he jumped fearfully from branch to branch and fluttered out of reach, then farther and farther away until he was lost from the view. See what you made me do, Mamma called, but immediately she sat down, sorry, knowing that the fault lay strictly with herself. Oh, my goodness, I must get better control of myself. I must. She shook her head. How could I? Now her daughter's pet was frightened, and even if he had eaten all of the berries she worked so hard to pick, Mamma did love that crow, and never meant to scare him. How betrayed by humans the bird must feel, she thought guiltily, and here she had trained him to eat from her hand, and now he was frightened of her. Come back, she called hopefully into the woods. Come back. But the bird, still crying out of confusion, only fled deeper into the woods. Mamma sat down sadly, ashamed of herself. That was how Okomias found her mother when she returned from town after her errand. Mamma told what had happened and how the crow had eaten the berries. Pinch was watching, and how she had gotten angry, frightened off the crow. She was now very sorry to have done that, and would help Okomias find the bird. Surely he will come back to you, said Mamma, and just as she was explaining why she had lost her temper and how hard she had worked to find those berries, Big Pinch groaned. Oh! What's wrong? Mamma asked. Oh! Big Pinch lay down, holding his stomach. It hurts, it hurts. Mama bent over her boy, inspecting him. A stomach? She was immediately suspicious. Gently but firmly, she took his hands in hers, uncurled them, saw the telltale juice marks of bruised chokecherries that darkened his fingertips. Then the pitiful berry-stained smile that sealed his guilt. Pinch, she said, and this time her voice was worse than angry. It was disappointed. You lied. The ghost foot carries off liars in the night. As for your stomach ache, there's no medicine but enduring the consequences of your greed. You'll have to suffer, Pinch. Maybe this will teach you. And with that, she and Okomias left with Angeline and went off into the woods, seeing if they could find the crow. Now, not far into the woods, they heard the crow's distinctive croak. Craw, craw. There, said Mamma, pointing. You go to him, Okomias. He doesn't trust me, and I don't blame him. She gave Okomias a crust of bread, a treat, and sent her. She gave Okomias a crust of bread, a treat, and sent her ahead, although she stayed within sight should Okomias need her. And something happened, sure enough, that made Mamma glad she stayed close, though she couldn't have explained it if she tried. Far ahead she heard branches cracking, and a sound she knew too well, a low coughing. Bears! High in the oak tree, stuffing themselves with acorns, the tubby young bears moved along the thinnest branches. More crashing, now a squeal. One of the bears ventured out too far, curious, and tumbled right out of the tree. He picked himself up and stood on his hind legs. The acorn-chubby belly stuck out like Lepure's, the man that had been visiting father. Then Mamma saw both little bears loping and bounding through the woods right towards Okomias. Daughter, she shouted. The bears are shy, and they wouldn't seek Okomias out to attack, surely. On the other hand, they could be dangerous, especially if wounded or angered. Mamma ran towards Okomias, but then stopped, afraid to disturb what took place. The two young bears bounded curiously toward her daughter. She saw Okomias turn sharply to the bears, and then, after a moment of surprise, Okomias greeted the animals. She stood quietly before them, and she was smiling. Mamma was further surprised and frightened when, without a sound of warning, a huge sow bear, fattened for the winter, rambled out of the bush and passed Okomias without acknowledging her. A human, as the least bit strange or out of place, and the younger bears she was talking to them. Mamma couldn't see. She crept near and listened to what the daughter said. Ah, she said to the nearest one, you've gotten fat. She smiled at their bumbling, chubby bodies. They were huge. Over the summer they had grown until they outweighed her by a great deal, though they still were bashful and hung back, just beyond the reach of her fingertips as she spoke to them. So, you're getting ready for sleep, she said, offering the pieces of bread. Here, my brothers, sleep well. The bears stood before her, testing the air, the unfamiliar smell of the bread, and then each one bent over and took a bit of the bread that she held, flicked it up with the muscular tongue, and loped off into the woods behind their mother, who was clearly just tired of them following her along, and grumpily because she wanted to go to sleep. Now the crow returned that evening to sit outside the circle of the outdoor cooking fire. He hopped a little closer when Okomias tempted him with a bit of stew meat. He never did trust Mamma again, though never did perch near and watch her at work, tipping his head side to side as though he were learning her actions. Let me read that again. He never did trust Mamma again, though he never did perch near and watch her at work, tipping his head side to side as though he were learning her actions. He still warned her of all approaching animals and strangers. But he was wary of her ever after she lost her temper, and kept his distance, which made her sad. The crow did, however, perform a great service in the winter cabin. While Okomias dragged kettle after kettle of mud to the side of the cabin, and along with Angeline chinked the cracks that had opened during the weather, the crow hunted. His vigilance and hatred for mice helped the whole family in their efforts to ready their cabin for winter. She chased mice, tried to pounce on them, swept them away with her wings, even caught a few and pecked them sharply as though to warn them, and they never did come back. They sought another cabin, other wigwams, where there were no frightful crows to bother them. And now it was time for harvest. The wild rice that grew across from the island in the great areas of the lake, where Mamma's brother and one of her sisters lived. It was part of the year that everyone looked forward to because there would be cousins to play with, games in the rice camps, the pleasures of talk, more visiting, more feasting. Early in the morning, then, they all set out in the canoe that they had worked on a year ago. It had been beautifully made, light and strong, carefully waterproofed, with pitch that Grandma had made, who kept it in good repair and in its own house by the side of the lake. They all got in, Mamma in back to paddle and steer, Grandma in front, taking turns with Angeline, who held the baby in his cradle board. They all fit into the canoe with plenty of room to spare. That space they hoped they would fill with the wild rice, the good seed that would sustain them through the winter. Okomayas envied her big sister. She wanted to hold and play with her smiling baby brother. Nimu had a second tooth and seemed even prouder of it than the first. Okomayas had saved a bit of hard bread for him to chew on. She put it into his mouth. The baby never even bit her. Okomayas put her finger to his cheek, stroked it softly. Why, oh why, did she have to take care of Big Pinch? She sighed and turned to him. She was in charge of Pinch, or he was in charge of her. She wasn't quite sure which, because it was one of his mischievous days when nothing she could do would satisfy him. Now the crow, perched on Okomayas' shoulder, was setting in for a long ride and sympathetic to poor Okomayas. He knew that Pinch had something to do with the bad day that Mamma had when she lost her temper. And before they started out, Grandma gave her tobacco to the water and asked for a safe and smooth crossing. The sun was mild and the waves low and the wind fresh but still warm, and things would have gone perfectly if Pinch had teased the crow. But he did, and every time he thought no one was looking, he tried to pull a feather out of the crow's tail. "Pinch," said Okomayas. "Pinch," said Angeline. "Pinch," said Mamma when he tried again. "Pinch," said Grandma wearily. "Pinch," said Okomayas again. They must have said it more times as they traveled the lake than there were waves or fish alongside them. They said it so many times that they didn't hear themselves any more. "Stop it, Pinch! Stop it! Stop it!" Same as when they would say it on shore. Pinch didn't hear. He just kept trying to pull a feather. Finally, Pinch got a hold of the black tip of the crow's pride and joy tail. "Pinch!" everyone gasped. This time it was the crow who spoke. Terrified at the crow's harsh croak, Pinch nearly threw himself out of the canoe, nearly tipped them all over in a panic to get to Mamma, who yelled, of course, "Pinch!" causing the crow to flap his wings and say again, "Pinch," which made Pinch cry of embarrassment, and he never did quite get over that. And from then on he regarded that crow with stubborn awe, treated the bird with reserved respect, and in fact behaved just a little bit better for a while, as Grandma told him that his rascal ways annoyed even the animals. Wait until you hear what Mukwa the bear says, or Grandfather Owl. Think of that, Nokomiya scolded. Pinch didn't want to. He didn't want to listen. And when they reached the river's entrance and paddled toward the rice camp, Grandma noted with disappointment the thinness of the rice stalks. Too much standing water in the spring had caused them to grow too quickly. Some of the rice heads drooped right over into the water. She frowned. The season would be a poor one unless the water in the other rice beds had been lower. They reached the shores of the camp And there, amid the general happiness at seeing one another, the grown-ups learned that the rice was indeed sparse that year. This was not good news, but the children could not have cared less. Nothing ruined their fun. Immediately, Okomayas raced off, her crow flapping alongside her, to find her cousins and introduce them to her pet crow. There, under the tree, she saw uh, Wishkob's daughters, Little Bee and Twilight, and her cousins, including Taha, a thin and quiet boy just a little older than Okomayas. He was the son of her mother's brother, Akwazini. And notice, children, the names are so different that we want to try to get them right, but if you come to names like that, make one that you know you can use because we're reading for meaning. So, as soon as she saw her mother's brother, Aki Wainzi, as soon as Okamaya saw Taha, an itchy, joking mood always came upon her, and she looked around to see what tricks she could play on her quiet cousin. His older brothers were rough and ran wild, and he had a sister known as Strong Swift Runner. Her name was Two Strike Girl, and she was better than most boys at hunting and fighting. She had to be forced to do things that girls normally did, and her mother and grandma had finally given up on her. I'm dancing the rice this year, Two Strikes Girl told Okomayas right off. That was most often the boy's job, but she had persuaded the rice chief that she could do it. So I think that is harvesting the rice. And children, if you remember in the video that we watched of the Eastern woodland people, when they were in the rice, they are in a boat and they go through and they're shaking the tops of the rice so that they can gather it for their cooking. Okay. Now, early the next morning, the rice boss blessed the harvest, and Mama set out with Auntie Muskrat, who poled in back, while Mama used her rice sticks to bend the stalks toward her and knock the rice grains off into the bottom of the boat. That year, although the harvest was not the best, there was rice for everyone, and as always, work that could not be avoided. Okomayas grumbled when Grandma asked her to pick the reeds. Take Two Strike Girl with you, she ordered. Pick enough for 2 mats. So Okomayas and her cousin went to the side of the where the rice grew, where the flattest reeds grew, and used their knives to slice off the rice reeds below the waterline, bunch after bunch, until they had great bundles that they had carried back to camp on their shoulders. Here, said Two Strike Girl, dumping hers off. She gathered herself to spring away, but Grandma caught her. Stay, ordered Grandma. Help your cousin weave. Two Strike Girl looked alarmed and then horrified at the idea of doing girls' work. Still, because she was ordered to do it by Grandma, she sat down beside Okomayas and began to weave the reeds into strong, simple mats that they would use to smoke the rice. Even now, the great fire Mamma had prepared was burning down to its embers, and as the girl's fingers moved unwillingly, Pinch was just as unwillingly gathering up rotten old pieces of maple wood to use in smoking the rice. And when he had gathered several piles of crumbling maple wood, and when the mats were finished, Okomayas regular and straight in its weave, and Two Strikes Girl's crooked and gaping, Mamma took the mats and set them over the smoking maple fire. Then, on top of the mats, she poured the rice, which began, after the mat was properly heated, to give almost a delicate nutty aroma. Using a rake made from a stick of red willow pulled up by its roots, the 2 girls took turns turning the rice over and over, smoking and toasting the grains. And as the rice cooked, it gathered the taste of the maple that it was cooking underneath. I can't take this any more, cried Two Strike Girl, throwing down the stick. If I have to work, at least I'm going to have some fun doing it. Running over to the bark-lined pit in the ground, she jumped in and began treading rice with a frantic pace that made everyone around her laugh. It was the sight of impatient Two Strike Girl dancing the rice that Okomayas would remember long after in the deep winter of that year. Her face was flushed and thrilled with effort. She was tireless. All day and the next, Two Strike's legs moved up and down, her feet in clean new moccasins, crushed the rough hulls of rice. She never stopped, and all the time her eyes were shining, her white teeth set in a huge grin, and and Okomias's crow danced up and down with her on a limb above. Come help me, she called to Okomias. Jumping to help her cousin, Okomias felt as proud and bold. And the two held hands and stepped high day after day, night after night. Although the family did not return with much rice that they needed, Okomias and Two Stripes Girl became such good friends that ever after they called each other sister. And that is the end of this chapter. So today, well, we found out that Pinch is kind of ornery, and that now the crow has kind of got him on nerve. And we also went to ricing with them. So Okomias and her sisters and brother and grandmother went down a ways to the river where the rice grows, and she and her extended family were ricing, and they chopped up the rice and they hulled it by stepping on it, breaking it. They roasted it, and that rice would, though they didn't get much of it, might be able to help them through the winter with food. So, very interesting. Tomorrow, the chapter is called The Move. So remember how I had told you, or how we had watched in our video, that the tribe will build their little homes, the wigwams, during the summer, and then during the winter they move into winter homes or winter lodges. And since Okomias' father was half French and half Native American, they actually, I see a picture, they live in a cabin. It is a little cabin. So, that is all I have for right now. Tomorrow is the move, and I'm wondering if they're going to be making their move to their new house. We will see. Have a wonderful day, my beautiful children. I cannot believe it's already Thursday.